I'm Brandon Whitaker, 34 years old, and for the past 8 years my alarm has gone off at 3:45 every single weekday morning, so I could be on a warehouse floor in Mesa Ridge, Arizona by 4:30 sharp, steel-toed boots laced tight, reflective vest on, already bracing myself for another 10-hour shift of loading pallets, managing inventory logs, and fixing whatever mechanical issue decides to flare up before sunrise. By the time most people are pouring their first cup of coffee, I've already been sweating under fluorescent lights for hours, scanning barcodes, coordinating shipments, and making sure nobody on my team gets hurt, because one careless mistake in that environment can cost someone a hand or worse. It's steady work, physically demanding but reliable, and I climbed my way up to senior warehouse technician through years of overtime, perfect attendance, and swallowing my pride when supervisors half my age try to micromanage me. My wife, Lauren Whitaker, is 31 and works in boutique marketing, which in her world means brand launches, curated Instagram feeds, networking events, and long lunches at places where the menu never lists prices. On weekends, she's usually at some upscale brunch spot with her influencer-style friend group, all of them dressed like they're being photographed, even when they claim they're just catching up. I've tagged along enough times to know the drill, the endless talk about aesthetic choices, travel plans, and brand partnerships, and I always feel like I'm standing slightly outside the frame of their lives, like the practical accessory no one really notices until the check arrives. Financially, I carry around 75% of our household expenses without making a scene about it. The mortgage alone is $2,300 a month, and that comes straight from my account along with utilities, internet, and both car payments. Lauren handles smaller bills like streaming subscriptions and groceries most of the time, and she contributes, but there's no denying that my paycheck is the backbone holding up the house we live in. I tell myself that this is what being a husband means, that being the steady provider is something to be proud of, that not everyone gets to build something stable in a world that feels like it's constantly shifting. Still, there are nights when I come home exhausted, shoulders aching and hands cracked from dry warehouse air, and I walk into a living room staged like a showroom, scented candles burning, throw pillows arranged just right, and I realize I don't quite belong to the polished version of life Lauren is curating. Around her friends, I'm the guy who works early, the dependable one, the one who does not have time for spontaneous trips because I can't just skip a shift without consequences. I've heard the subtle jokes about my schedule, about how I live at the warehouse, and I laugh along because that is easier than admitting it stings. For years I convinced myself that this was normal, that marriage is about compromise, and that my role was to absorb the exhaustion quietly while she chased her ambitions in a world that runs on image and connections. I told myself appreciation does not always come in obvious forms, and that love can exist even when gratitude feels thin. I pushed down the small voice that wondered why I was always the one adjusting, always the one stretching my limits, always the one too tired to fully participate in the life we were supposedly building together. I believed that as long as the bills were paid and the house stayed standing, that was enough, even if I was constantly drained and rarely felt truly seen. That Sunday started like most of my Sundays do, with me dragging myself out of bed before the sun had fully risen, my body already sore from the week behind me, and bracing for another 10-hour shift that felt longer than usual, because we were short-staffed and 2 shipments had arrived late, which meant everything had to be reorganized under pressure, while supervisors barked updates over the radio. By the time I clocked out, my shoulders were tight, my lower back throbbed with every step, and my hands felt stiff from gripping pallet jacks all morning, and all I wanted was to go home, collapse on the couch, and let the quiet settle around me for a few hours. Instead, my phone kept buzzing in my pocket throughout the last part of my shift, Lauren's name lighting up the screen again and again with reminders about brunch at some trendy cafe in Northbrook Heights that had apparently just opened and was already impossible to get into without reservations booked weeks in advance. Her messages weren't cruel, but they carried that impatient undertone that told me showing up mattered more than how I felt. Little lines about how everyone was excited to see me and how it would look weird if I skipped, how Samantha had specifically asked if I was coming, and how Chloe's boyfriend had made an effort last time. Even though my eyelids felt heavy and my head pounded from dehydration and lack of sleep, I drove home, took a quick shower that did little to wash off the exhaustion clinging to me, changed into clean jeans and a button-down that still felt too tight across my sore shoulders, and got back in the car for the 40-minute drive across town. Traffic crawled, and the Arizona sun seemed harsher than usual, glaring through the windshield as if mocking the fact that I should have been resting. When I finally pulled up, already running late, I could see through the cafe's tall glass windows that Lauren and her 4 friends were deep into their afternoon, clustered around a marble-top table near the patio, sunglasses perched on perfectly styled hair, their laughter spilling out each time the door opened. Samantha spotted me first, but only gave a brief wave before turning back to whatever Madison was saying. And when I reached the table, the energy barely shifted. Lauren leaned over to kiss my cheek quickly, the scent of citrus perfume and champagne lingering in the air, then went right back into the conversation without pausing to ask how my shift had gone. They were already halfway through bottomless cocktails, tall glasses sweating in the heat, plates of half-eaten avocado toast, and truffle fries scattered across the table. And the conversation revolved entirely around a $6,000 girls' getaway they were planning to Scottsdale, complete with spa packages, a private cabana, and coordinated outfits for photos by the pool. Erica was scrolling through resort options on her phone, while Chloe debated which weekend would generate the best social media engagement, and Lauren chimed in enthusiastically about how she deserved a break after such a stressful quarter at work. I stood there for a moment before quietly taking the empty chair at the end of the table. Feeling like an afterthought inserted into a scene already in motion, a server approached, and I ordered a simple black coffee, because the thought of alcohol on an empty, exhausted stomach made me feel slightly nauseous. And as I sat there listening to them calculate flight prices and split costs without once glancing in my direction, I realized no one had asked how my morning had been. No one had noticed the fatigue etched into my face, and no one seemed remotely concerned with whether I was okay. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the dark liquid swirl, and felt that familiar sense of being present yet invisible settle over me once again. As the second round of cocktails arrived and the volume of the table rose along with it, the conversation drifted away from vacation planning and slid naturally into the topic that always seemed to entertain them the most: their husbands, their boyfriends, their almost relationships, all of it treated like ongoing episodes in some streaming series they were collectively producing. Samantha started by complaining about how her husband never posts about her on social media, framing it as a sign of emotional neglect, and Chloe chimed in with a dramatic story about her boyfriend refusing to attend a rooftop party because he had an early meeting the next morning. Laughter erupted, exaggerated and theatrical, and Madison declared that any man who prioritizes work over lifestyle clearly does not understand modern relationships. Lauren, cheeks flushed from champagne and sunlight, leaned back in her chair and laughed in a way that felt unfamiliar, louder and sharper than usual, then casually said that she basically lives like she is single anyway because I'm always at work, that she wakes up alone most mornings and goes to events alone most evenings, and that she has learned to plan her life as if she does not have a husband unless it is convenient. The table reacted instantly, a chorus of agreement and sympathetic clucks, as if she had just revealed some deep personal hardship, and Erica reached over to squeeze her hand dramatically while saying that she could never tolerate a man who chooses work over lifestyle. I felt the words land in my chest heavier than the fatigue that had been weighing on me all day, because the long hours they were mocking were the same hours that covered the mortgage on our house, the same hours that paid for the car she drove to these brunches, the same hours that funded the boutique wardrobe and spontaneous dinners and the very getaway they had been planning minutes earlier. None of them acknowledged that reality, and Lauren did not correct them or soften the narrative. Instead, she continued, saying that she sometimes forgets what it feels like to have a partner who is fully present, that she envies couples who travel together and attend weekday events without worrying about clocking in before sunrise. The conversation became increasingly performative, each of them dissecting their relationships as if they were analyzing plot lines for engagement metrics, critiquing behavior, assigning labels, ranking emotional availability, and tossing around phrases about standards and alignment. They spoke about men as lifestyle accessories, something that either enhanced their image or dragged it down, and I sat at the edge of the table feeling less like a husband and more like a silent exhibit placed there for contrast. No one asked me to speak, and even if they had, I'm not sure my voice would have carried over the laughter and clinking glasses. I stared down at my coffee, now lukewarm, tracing the rim of the cup with my finger while they joked that if a man cannot match their social energy, then he is simply not the right fit. Lauren nodded along, saying she has had to adjust her expectations, implying that my dedication to work was some kind of personal shortcoming rather than the foundation that allowed her flexibility. I felt invisible and overly visible at the same time, physically present yet stripped of depth, reduced to a convenient example in a conversation about what not to accept. The realization settled quietly inside me that afternoon, that in their world I was not a partner with sacrifices and exhaustion and intent, but a background character whose labor existed solely to support a lifestyle that did not seem to include me emotionally at all. The moment that truly shifted something inside me happened when Lauren leaned back in her chair with exaggerated flair, one arm draped over the backrest, as if she were delivering a punchline she had perfected, and announced in a voice just loud enough to command the entire table that she gives our marriage maybe 5 more months at best, because we are clearly on different trajectories, and she feels like she has outgrown the version of life I represent. She did not look at me when she said it, and that detail somehow made it worse, because it felt less like a confrontation and more like a performance, as if I were simply part of the stage design rather than a participant in the story being told about my own marriage. The reaction was immediate and disturbingly enthusiastic, not shocked gasps or awkward silence, but actual applause-level laughter, hands clapping against tabletops, Samantha nearly spilling her drink as she threw her head back, Chloe saying she had been waiting for Lauren to finally admit it out loud. Madison joked that she had predicted this timeline months ago, and Erica leaned forward with a conspiratorial grin and said something about personal growth requiring difficult upgrades. Their familiarity with the statement struck me harder than the words themselves, because it became painfully clear that this was not a spontaneous, alcohol-fueled exaggeration, but a narrative already shared and refined in rooms I had never entered. I could almost picture the scenes unfolding without me. Wine nights in softly lit kitchens, girls' dinners at rooftop lounges, private group chats filled with screenshots and commentary, Lauren recounting our life in fragments tailored for entertainment, my long shifts turned into punchlines, my exhaustion framed as emotional absence, my quiet personality recast as incompatibility. The ease with which they received her declaration told me they had heard variations of it before, that my marriage had been discussed, dissected, and possibly ridiculed long before I ever sat down at that table with my black coffee. Lauren continued, saying she feels like she is accelerating toward a different future, one filled with travel, connections, and spontaneous experiences, while I remain anchored to routine and responsibility, and she spoke about it, as though she were analyzing market trends rather than dismantling a commitment we had made to each other. She did not mention the mortgage payments, or the early alarms, or the overtime shifts that supported the very lifestyle she now framed as proof of our incompatibility. Instead, she described growth as something that required shedding what no longer aligns, and the implication hung heavy in the air that I was the outdated piece. I sat there feeling an odd mix of humiliation and clarity, because in that instant I understood that whatever fractures existed between us had been discussed extensively in my absence. I was not hearing about doubts for the first time. I was witnessing the polished version of a storyline that had likely been rehearsed for weeks, maybe months, shaped into something digestible and dramatic for her audience. The laughter around the table no longer sounded lighthearted but rehearsed, like an inside joke I had unknowingly become. The realization settled deep in my chest that I had not just been physically absent from these gatherings, but symbolically reduced to a recurring character in stories told for amusement, a convenient example of what she was supposedly evolving beyond. I did not slam my cup down, I did not raise my voice, and I did not give them the dramatic confrontation they might have expected after a declaration like that, because something inside me had already gone still in a way that felt colder than anger. I looked at Lauren for the first time since she had made that announcement, really looked at her, at the faint smirk still lingering at the corner of her mouth, and the way her friends leaned toward her like an approving audience waiting for the next line. I let a few seconds pass, long enough for the laughter to taper off into curious silence, and then I said calmly that 5 months was generous and that I would give it 5 minutes instead. The words did not come out sharp or emotional. They came out measured, almost conversational, which made them land heavier than if I had shouted. For a split second no one reacted because I do not think they believed I would respond in any meaningful way, and then I reached down to my left hand, twisted my wedding ring slowly off my finger, feeling the familiar pressure ease as the metal slid free, and placed it directly in the center of the marble table between Lauren's half-empty cocktail glasses. The small metallic sound it made against the surface was louder than it should have been, sharp and clean, and it cut through the patio noise like a signal flare. The entire table went quiet, and then, almost as if on cue, the surrounding patio did too, conversations at neighboring tables fading as people sensed the shift in energy. Samantha's smile dropped first, Chloe's eyes widened, Madison stopped mid-sip, and Erica's hand froze in the air with her phone still angled toward the table. Lauren's expression changed in real time from amused confidence to visible panic, her posture straightening, as if someone had pulled a string attached to her spine. She immediately started talking, saying it was just humor, that everyone jokes like that I was taking it too seriously, that I knew she did not mean it literally. I told her evenly that she had just publicly declared the expiration date of our marriage, and that I was simply respecting her timeline, that if 5 months was her projection, then 5 minutes felt more honest given the clarity of the moment. My voice did not waver. I did not look at her friends when I spoke, because this was no longer a performance for them, and I refused to turn it into one. I did not insult her. I did not recount the bills I paid or the mornings I sacrificed. I did not list the ways I had supported her ambitions, because none of that mattered in that instant. What mattered was that she had chosen to reduce our marriage to a punchline in front of an audience, and I was choosing not to participate in that script any longer. Lauren reached toward the ring as if to push it back to me, her voice softer now, saying I was embarrassing her, saying we could talk about it at home, but I stepped back from the table before her fingers could close around it. I straightened my shirt, felt the weight of the long day still sitting in my shoulders, and turned away without raising my voice, without another explanation, and without looking back at the patio that had gone so still it felt staged. I walked through the cafe, past the host stand, and out into the bright Arizona afternoon, leaving the ring behind in the center of the table, where she had placed our future on display. I barely made it halfway home before my phone started vibrating nonstop in the cup holder. Lauren's name flashing across the screen again and again with a persistence that bordered on frantic, and by the time I pulled into a grocery store parking lot to collect myself, there were already more than a dozen missed calls stacked on top of each other. I did not answer any of them, and as I sat there staring at the steering wheel, the messages began pouring in, long paragraphs followed by short bursts of anger, then sudden pleas for me to come back so we could talk like adults. Within hours, the number climbed past 40 calls and nearly 60 messages, alternating between accusations that I had humiliated her publicly and desperate claims that she had just been joking and that I was throwing everything away over nothing. The tone shifted with every few texts. One minute she was furious and telling me I had embarrassed her in front of her friends and made her look unstable. The next minute she was saying she loved me and that I knew how her friends exaggerate things and that we could fix this if I stopped being stubborn. I read enough to understand the pattern and then blocked her number entirely because the chaos in those messages felt less like remorse and more like damage control. Instead of going back to the house, I drove straight to my longtime friend Tyler Morgan's apartment on the other side of town, the kind of friend who does not ask for explanations before offering his couch. Tyler opened the door, took one look at my face, and stepped aside without a single question, and that silence felt more respectful than anything I had experienced that afternoon. I slept in his spare room that night, the quiet hum of his old ceiling fan the only sound in the dark, and for the first time in years I did not set an alarm because I had already taken the next day off after the brutal shift. Even so, I barely slept, my mind replaying the patio scene over and over, the ring on the table, the laughter, the realization that I had been a storyline rather than a partner. The next morning, just as the sun was rising, my phone buzzed with a notification from a number I did not immediately recognize, and when I opened it, I saw it was Erica, the quietest of Lauren's friends, the one who had spoken the least at brunch, and had mostly observed. Her message was short at first, asking if I was somewhere safe and if I could talk privately, and there was something about the tone that felt different from the performative energy of the day before. I agreed, and what followed was not gossip, but information delivered with careful detail. She told me that Lauren had been consulting a divorce attorney since May, months before that brunch, and that the narrative about different trajectories and outgrowing me had been circulating in their private conversations long before I ever heard it out loud. According to Erica, the plan had been to provoke me into leaving first, to create a situation where I would walk out so it could be framed as abandonment, giving Lauren a stronger financial position in any proceedings and supporting a story that I was emotionally neglectful and financially controlling. Erica said Lauren had been advised that if she could demonstrate I prioritized work over the marriage and limited access to money, even though the majority of our expenses were covered by my income, it would strengthen her claim for support and potentially a larger share of assets. Hearing that, the pieces that had felt scattered began aligning in a way that was both clarifying and unsettling, because it meant the public expiration date of our marriage had not been a drunken impulse, but part of a strategy already in motion. The ring on the table had not disrupted a fragile relationship. It had interrupted a plan that relied on me, reacting predictably and quietly absorbing blame. Standing in Tyler's kitchen with my phone in my hand, I understood that what had looked like a humiliating moment was actually the first time I'd stepped outside a script that had been written about me without my knowledge. When Erica sent the screenshots, I did not open them immediately because a part of me already knew what they would confirm, but once I forced myself to read through them, the illusion that any of this had been impulsive disappeared completely. The group chat messages were time-stamped going back months. Lauren casually discussing asset division, as if she were planning a vacation itinerary, calculating what the house could be valued at in the current market, and debating whether it would be smarter to push for spousal support by framing me as emotionally absent and financially restrictive. In one message, she described me as predictable, saying I would never actually walk away because I was too committed to stability. And in another, she laughed about how easy it would be to provoke me into leaving first, so she could claim abandonment and position herself as the wrong spouse trying to hold things together. Seeing my marriage reduced to strategy and leverage in black and white did something inside me that no amount of humiliation at brunch could have accomplished, because it stripped away any remaining doubt that I might have misunderstood the situation. There were jokes about how I would keep paying the mortgage no matter how cold things got, comments about how working long hours made it easy to paint me as neglectful, and even a discussion about documenting minor disagreements to build a pattern of emotional distance. It was calculated, layered, and rehearsed, and I realized that the only reason her panic had surfaced at brunch was because I had stepped outside the narrative she assumed I would follow. Within hours, I contacted a reputable divorce attorney in Oak Ridge County whose name Tyler recommended, and during our first consultation, I laid everything out chronologically, from the public declaration to the screenshots Erica had provided. He listened carefully, reviewed the messages, and told me plainly that filing first would give me a significant advantage, especially given the documented evidence of premeditated manipulation and strategic intent. He advised me to preserve every message, every financial record, and every communication, and to let the legal process handle what emotions could not. 2 weeks later, Lauren was formally served, and the shift in her tone was immediate and dramatic. She attempted to confront me at work one afternoon, arriving at the warehouse parking lot visibly upset and demanding we talk, but I refused to engage beyond telling her all communication would go through counsel. She then pivoted publicly, posting vague statements online about betrayal and abandonment, implying that I had walked out without warning and left her financially vulnerable. However, once her attorney was presented with the screenshots and the documented timeline showing months of planning, consultation with legal counsel, and strategic discussions about provoking a reaction, the narrative she had been preparing began to unravel quickly. In mediation, the evidence spoke louder than any emotional appeal she attempted, and the structure of our finances was clear, with records showing I had paid the majority of our shared expenses while maintaining separate savings that were traceable and transparent. Ultimately, the settlement was clean and decisive, with Lauren keeping the house along with its remaining mortgage debt, while I retained my personal savings, my truck, and walked away without any obligation to pay alimony. It was not a victory in the sense of celebration, but it was closure grounded in documentation rather than drama, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had regained control of my own narrative instead of being cast as a character in someone else's script. 6 months after that patio afternoon that split my life in two, I was standing in the warehouse office listening to my regional manager confirm my promotion to operations supervisor, a title I had worked toward quietly for years without ever imagining how different it would feel to accept it without the weight of someone else's expectations attached to it. The salary increase was substantial enough that I no longer had to calculate every overtime shift against a shared mortgage or justify the hours I invested in my career, and for the first time my work felt entirely aligned with my own future, instead of propping up a lifestyle that had been quietly planning to discard me. I moved into a modern one-bedroom apartment near Canyon Lake, a place with large windows that let in morning light without the pressure of curated decor or stage perfection, and I chose furniture based on comfort and function rather than aesthetic approval from a social circle. The silence there felt different from the silence I used to feel at home. It was not the quiet of emotional distance, but the calm of autonomy, where every object in the space reflected a decision I had made for myself. I set my alarm for the same early hour, drove the same routes to work, but the exhaustion no longer carried resentment because it was tied directly to my own stability and growth. Around that time, I began spending more time with a colleague named Natalie Brooks, someone I had known in passing for years, but never really spoken to beyond brief exchanges on the warehouse floor. She valued consistency over image, preferred simple dinners to elaborate outings, and listened without turning every conversation into a performance. There was no need to prove anything, no need to compete with curated lifestyles or compare trajectories, just a steady rhythm of shared understanding. She respected the discipline it took to wake up before dawn and the responsibility behind long shifts, not as a flaw, but as a sign of reliability. Meanwhile, the version of events Lauren had tried to broadcast began collapsing under scrutiny. Once the truth about the screenshots and the premeditated strategy surfaced through legal channels, her social circle fractured in subtle but undeniable ways. Some distanced themselves quietly, unwilling to be associated with manipulation exposed in documented detail, while others who had once laughed at rehearsed punchlines stopped engaging publicly with her posts. The online statements she had crafted about betrayal and abandonment lost traction once inconsistencies became impossible to ignore, and the narrative she had prepared to leverage for sympathy dissolved under the weight of evidence she had not expected me to preserve. I did not feel vindictive watching that unravel. I felt clarified. The house she had fought to keep became a financial burden she had to manage alone. The image-driven lifestyle she had framed as growth revealed itself as fragile when stripped of strategic advantage, and I realized that the most valuable thing I walked away with was not my savings or my truck, but the understanding that respect is not negotiable. Loyalty is not a joke to be rehearsed for entertainment, and commitment is not something to weaponize for leverage. The clearest lesson of my life settled quietly into place. That staying in a relationship where respect is optional and your dedication is treated as a punchline will eventually cost you more than leaving ever will.